Welcome to the deep dive. Okay, imagine this. What if the answers to life's, biggest questions, like what happens when we die, or how can we find real happiness, weren't locked away in some complicated philosophy? What if they were actually direct experiences, something you could tap into right now? Today, that's what we're exploring. We're diving deep into the very practical, really transformative teachings of Bhagavan Sri Ramana Maharshi. Our mission here is to take his key work, teachings of Ramana Maharshi in his own words, and really pull out the most important insights for you. We'll be your guides, sort of shortcutting your way to getting a solid handle on this profound wisdom. So no dense theories, promise. We're aiming for those surprising facts and just a clear, accessible understanding of what it all means.
Yeah, and what's really striking about Ramana Maharshi, is that he wasn't setting out to be a philosopher. He wasn't building some complex system. Our source actually describes him as a realized man speaking from direct knowledge. So his teachings, they're distilled right from his own deep personal experience and also from literally thousands of conversations he had over, 50 years. This isn't just theory. It feels much more like a direct transmission of, living truth.
Okay, so let's start right at the beginning then. The origin story here is just astonishing. It wasn't years of study, no meditating in a cave somewhere. It was this sudden, really intense fear of death that just gripped him when he was only 16 in Madurai. And the weird part, he was perfectly healthy, no reason for it externally, just this raw internal terror about dying. Can you even imagine feeling that? But instead of, panicking or running to someone, the source says he did something quite dramatic. He launched this internal investigation. He actually lay down, made himself stiff like a corpse, held his breath, and started asking himself mentally, okay, death's here. What did that mean? What is it that's dying? The body dies. He literally acted out his own death to get to the bottom of it.
And that led to this incredible aha moment, a direct perception. He called it living truth. He suddenly knew, I am spirit transcending the body. The body dies, but the spirit that transcends it, that cannot be touched by death. That means I am the deathless spirit.
Yeah.
And the key thing here is, this wasn't just a nice thought. It apparently flashed through him vividly, almost without any thinking involved, a direct perception.
Right, a direct knowing.
Exactly. Now, lots of people might have a glimpse of something like that, maybe briefly, but for Ramana, this was different. The source really emphasizes that his absorption in the self continued unbroken from that time on. Unbroken. It marked his constant identity with the universal self from that point forward, and pretty soon after that, he left home, went to Tiruvannamalai, to the holy hill Arunachala, and basically stayed there.
So that direct personal experience must have shaped everything he taught later, right? It wasn't coming from books.
Absolutely. That's why his teachings feel so practical, so non-academic. They really flowed directly from that knowledge. He even said himself, something like, I was indeed fortunate that I never took to philosophy. Had I taken to it, I would probably be nowhere. But my inherent tendencies led me directly to inquire, who am I? How fortunate. His path was all about that direct inquiry.
Which leads us right into the core of his teaching, doesn't it? This non-dualistic view, the idea that ultimately everything is one, no separation. And again, this wasn't something he just adopted. He knew it from experience, though it did align perfectly with the ancient teachings of Shankara, showing how timeless this understanding is.
Right. And what's really interesting, I think, is how this affected his view of the world itself. He basically said it's not worth any special study, analysis, or discussion. Why? Because, as he put it, the world appears as a passing shadow in a flood of light. It's secondary. He felt the real point of scriptures wasn't to lay out complicated creation theories. They might mention them, sure, for those interested, but the main purpose, to deal with the self.
Okay, so let's talk about that self. The self in consciousness. What was his take?
Well, Ramana taught that realization is eternal and already exists, here and now. It's not something you achieve later, it's already the case. And consciousness, that's pure knowledge. It's the fundamental reality, and the mind, with all its thoughts and activity, just arises from that underlying consciousness.
So if consciousness is primary, where does the ego fit in? That sense of me we all walk around with.
Yeah, the ego. He was pretty rigorous about this. He essentially refused to admit its existence as a truly real entity. He called it things like a spurious eye or even a phantom, something that seems to pop up between that pure consciousness and the physical body, which he saw as insentient, not conscious in itself. He even went so far as to say that the whole point of scriptures and spiritual practice is the elimination of this phantom ego.
Okay, but here's something many people, including myself, run into. You try to seek the eye, you look inwards, and you find, nothing seems to be there. It can be confusing. What did Ramana say about that? What is that nothing?
Yeah, that's a common experience. He'd say that's because you're used to identifying with your body, and you think seeing means seeing with your eyes, like seeing an object. But he'd ask, what is there to be seen, and by whom, and how? There's only one consciousness. So that awareness itself is the I. That's it. Realize it, and that is the truth. It's not about seeing something, it's about being the awareness that's looking.
That makes sense. It shifts the perspective entirely. And related to this, he introduced that interesting idea of the heart at the right side of the chest,
Yeah.
not the physical organ, right?
Right, definitely not the physical heart. He meant it as the spiritual center, the source of that pure awareness, that fundamental sense of being.
Yeah.
And he was clear this was different from just intellectual thinking or even focusing on other chakras or energy centers, which he kind of saw as maybe more indirect ways. This heart on the right was the direct spot, the locus of your true I-ness, not an idea, but the actual core of your being.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. How did Ramana handle those really common human concerns like, death and rebirth? People must have asked him constantly.
Oh, absolutely. But he often tended to redirect those questions. He'd say things like, whatever is born must die, whatever is acquired must be lost. But were you born? You are eternally existent. The self can never be lost. His point was always to bring the focus back to realizing the self right here, right now, instead of getting lost in preoccupation with such questions, as the source puts it.
But did he sometimes meet people where they were? If someone firmly believed in rebirth, for example?
Yes, that's an important aspect. He was very adaptable. The source says he might sometimes discuss things from a lower contingent point of view, acknowledging concepts like rebirth if the person wasn't quite ready for the pure non-dual truth. And while he always showed compassion, especially to those grieving, his ultimate teaching was that grief comes from false values, from identifying with what's transient. His deeper advice was more like, die yourself, meaning the ego, and be lost, becoming one with the self of all.
That's quite direct.
Mhm.
And what about worldly suffering? Famine, war, disease. This is often a huge stumbling block for people exploring non-duality. How did he address that? It can sound dismissive if not understood properly.
It can, and it's definitely one of his more radical sounding points. His response was often stark. To whom does all this appear? Now, the insight there isn't about ignoring suffering, it's about shifting the identification. He asserted that the world and all its miseries are not real when you're identified with the true self, with that pure consciousness. His advice sounds extreme. If you remain free from pain, there will be no pain anywhere. He urged people to turn inwards and seek the self, and there will be an end both of the world and of its miseries.
So the freedom starts within. By changing your identification, you change your experience of reality, including suffering.
Precisely. It's about freeing your internal sense of self from the illusion that it's fundamentally tied to that external pain.
And he connected this internal work directly to how we interact with the world, didn't he? The idea that self-reform leads to social reform.
Yes, exactly. Self-reform automatically results in social reform. He had that great analogy of the luggage on the train. Why carry your burdens, material or spiritual, on your own head, he asked, when the train, which he likened to the Lord or the underlying power, is already carrying the whole load? Trust the process.
Which brings up the question of helping others. If a realized person sees no others, how does that work? Did Ramana advocate for action or inaction?
It's a subtle point. He stated that the spiritual force of realization is far more powerful than the use of all occult powers. Just the fact of someone's self-realization, he said, is itself enough to make the others happy too.
Wow. That sounds almost passive, though. Does it mean a sage just sits there indifferent?
Not indifferent in a callous way, it's more that from the sage's perspective, the illusion of separate others has dissolved. So the way they help is different. He actually referenced Lao Tse. By his non-action, the sage governs all. And Ramana explained this doesn't mean doing nothing. He said non-action is unceasing activity. He compared it to a spinning top that's going so fast it looks completely still. There's intense activity happening, but it's operating from a much deeper, quieter level of reality. It's engagement, but not from the ego level.
Okay, so how does one get to that state? Let's talk about the paths he recommended. You focus mainly on two, right? Self-inquiry and surrender.
That's right. Two primary paths, both ultimately aiming for the same thing, the complete effacement of the ego, wiping out that false sense of,
Let's unpack self-inquiry first, the famous who am I question.
Yes, but he stressed it's not an empty formula you just repeat like a mantra. It's meant to be an intense activity of the entire mind to keep it steadily poised in pure self-awareness. He had that sharp analogy asking the mind to kill the mind is like making the thief the policeman. It can't really do it directly. The goal isn't to get an intellectual answer to who am I? It's to use the question to dive inward, relentlessly, to find the place whence the I originates. When you do that persistently, the individual I, that ego thought, eventually falls down abashed, as he put it, and then reality, the true self, reviews itself spontaneously as I.
I, not just I.
Yes, emphasizing its continuous self-luminous nature.
Okay, and the other path? Surrender. How did he describe that?
He said, complete surrender is another name for jnana, or liberation. Jnana, meaning that true knowledge, that wisdom. It means giving oneself up to the original cause of one's being, realizing your source is actually within you, and letting go of the separate self. But crucially, he pointed out that true surrender means having no desire of your own. It's about aligning completely with God's will, or the flow of reality. As he said, you cannot ask him to obey you and yet think you have surrendered. You have to let go entirely.
That sounds like it might involve guidance. What was his view on the role of a guru? He himself didn't have a human one, did he?
No, he didn't, which he noted is rare. But he absolutely affirmed the role of the guru. He said the guru is God or the self, but manifested externally, like the human embodiment of divine grace, to help the seeker. He mentioned initiation could happen through touch or a look or even silence. His own realization came through silence, that inner awareness. And he had a beautiful point about grace. It's not something outside you, he said. In fact, your very desire for grace is due to grace that is already working in you. That pull towards realization is grace itself.
Powerful. But it also sounds like maybe it just happens. Yet you mentioned effort before. He talked about meditation being a fight.
Yes, absolutely. It's easy to hear effortless awareness and think it means just kicking back. But he was very clear. Getting there usually requires effort. He pointed out that our minds have these age-old vasanas, deep-seated tendencies that constantly pull our attention outwards to objects and thoughts. So he insisted, all such thoughts have to be given up and the mind turned inwards, and that, for most people, requires effort. It's a fight against ingrained mental habits. The state is effortless, but the path often isn't initially.
That's an important distinction. And how did he see self-inquiry compared to other practices, like maybe meditating I am Brahman or trying to have visions?
He consistently brought it back to the core. He'd say that true vision does not mean seeing, but being. It's not about experiencing something separate from you, even a divine vision. And he made that profound statement. I am is Siva. Meaning your fundamental sense of existence, that core I amness is the divine reality, is Siva.
It collapses the subject-object distinction entirely.
Exactly. It's not about becoming something new or acquiring a state you don't have. It's about realizing what is already realized, ever realized, and never non-realized. It's always true. You just have to uncover it.
So this leads us to the ultimate goal itself, self-realization. What did he say about that state?
He described it simply as the final goal and is itself the purpose. It's the end of discontent, the end of seeking. And importantly, reality remains the same, eternal and unchanging, whether one realizes it or not. Realization doesn't change reality. It changes your perception of reality. You align with what already is.
What about different kinds or stages of liberation? People talk about Jivan Mukti and Vidaha Mukti.
Right, liberation while living versus after the body drops. Ramana basically said, look, there are no stages in realization or mukti and no degrees of liberation. You're either realized or you're not. He explained that those distinctions, Jivan Mukti, Vidaha Mukti, they exist only for the onlooker, for the person observing the sage. They don't exist for the realized person themselves. He used that Vedanta analogy of the drunken man who is so oblivious he does not notice whether he is wearing his shawl or whether it has fallen off. The state of the body is irrelevant to their inner state.
And he also talked about the fourth state, didn't he? Turiya.
Yes, Turiya. The underlying reality that transcends the three familiar states we cycle through: waking, dreaming, and deep, dreamless sleep. It's the continuous, pure consciousness that's always present beneath them all.
So how does someone live in that state? How does it manifest in daily life? This brings us to Sahaja Samadhi, right?
Exactly. Sahaja Samadhi was a key part of his teaching on the realized state. It doesn't necessarily mean being zoned out in a trance. It means remaining calm and composed during activity. You realize that you are moved by the deeper real self within and are unaffected by what you do or say or think. You act, but the ego isn't the actor. And this state, he said, brings profound happiness because all the other kinds of happiness we chase are just reflections of the Ananda, the pure bliss, which in your true nature you are.
So the realized person might still be active in the world, working, talking.
Yeah.
It just doesn't touch their inner state.
Precisely. Whether they continue worldly activity or not makes no difference to his state. Their body might still have its own destiny to play out, but they, the self, have transcended all destiny. They live in the world, but they're not bound by it. They abide in that bliss.
It all comes back to that fundamental truth he kept pointing to.
Yes. I am, that core statement of being. He noted it's what God taught Moses. It's the bedrock. The self is the self. That is all that can be said of it. Pure, simple, undeniable existence.
Wow. Well, that's been quite a journey through Ramana Maharshi's teachings.
Mm.
We've really seen how they offer such a direct, practical path. It's about understanding the self, going beyond fear and suffering, seeing through that illusion of being separate. It really is a powerful call to look within.
Absolutely. And the key takeaway, I think, is that this isn't about complex mental gymnastics. It's about direct experience. And it's accessible, he taught, through that consistent self-enquiry or through complete surrender. It's about realizing what you fundamentally are.
So maybe a final thought to leave everyone with. If Ramana said that the extinction of the ego that asks which form of liberation is true is the only true liberation, well, maybe the biggest block isn't what you don't know. Maybe it's what you think you already know about who you are, about reality. What would it really truly mean from that to simply be still and know that I am God? Something to reflect on after this deep dive. Consider how these timeless ideas might just resonate with your own life, your own experience.